A billionaire owner walked into his store disguised as an ordinary man, and what he saw that day changed his life forever. Marcus Grayson pushed the cap lower over his forehead and adjusted the plain jacket he wore. He looked like a simple middle-aged customer, not the man whose name was printed on the company's shares, reports, and every store's legal paperwork. Today, he didn't want to be the CEO. Today, he wanted to be invisible. The sliding doors opened with quiet hiss, and he stepped into one of his own stores. Bright fluorescent lights glared down at perfectly arranged aisles. Shelves overflowed with cereals, fruit, snacks, and the usual brands. At first glance, it looked like any other ordinary day of business. But Marcus wasn't here for appearances. He was here because for months, a quiet unease had been growing inside him. Every report, every chart, every glowing review from his regional managers painted the same picture. Everything is perfect. Employee satisfaction, 95%. Customer complaints, nearly zero. Sales, steady growth. And yet, numbers could lie. Marcus knew that. He had built his empire from the ground up, and the one lesson he had learned was simple. The truth never lived in the spreadsheets. The truth lived in the hallways, the back rooms, the whispered conversations between employees when they thought no one important was listening. So here he was, blending in with the crowd, his identity hidden. No one gave him a second glance. The security guard at the entrance nodded politely. The cashiers continued scanning groceries, and the manager on duty didn't even notice him walk in. At first, Marcus only observed. He noticed the tight smiles on the cashiers' faces, the way a young stock boy rushed nervously after dropping a box, and how two employees avoided eye contact when the manager passed by. Something in the air felt heavy, like a silence nobody dared to break. And then he heard it. At first, he thought it was the squeak of a cartwheel. But no, this sound was softer, fragile, filled with the kind of pain that made his chest tighten. It was crying. Someone was crying inside his store. Marcus followed the sound carefully. It was coming from the staff area, near the employee restroom. He paused in the hallway, listening closely. The sobbing was quiet but broken. Someone trying and failing to hold themselves together. He stepped closer. Under the door, on the wet tile floor, lay a silver name badge. It read, Maria Santos, custodian. Marcus's throat tightened. This wasn't just sadness. These were the cries of a woman at her breaking point. For a moment, he stood frozen, the harsh fluorescent light above flickering slightly. Just 3 months ago, corporate reports had praised this very store as a model location, outstanding performance, happy staff, zero issues. But here, behind a restroom door, was a reality those reports had completely erased. One terrifying thought cut through his mind like ice. If this was happening right under his nose, in his own company, what else had he missed? He knocked gently. "Excuse me, are you all right in there?" The crying stopped abruptly. For a moment, there was silence, then the sound of shuffling, as if someone was quickly trying to wipe away their tears. I'm fine," a shaky voice answered. "Just give me a minute." But Marcus knew the difference between fine and broken, and this was broken. When the door finally creaked open, a petite woman in her early 40s stepped out. Maria Santos. Her janitorial uniform was wrinkled, her dark hair tied back messily, her eyes red and swollen from crying. She bent down quickly to retrieve her name badge, but her hand shook so badly she almost dropped it again. "I'm sorry," she whispered, not meeting his eyes. "I shouldn't be here. I need to get back to work." Marcus studied her more carefully. Her hands were cracked and raw, scarred from harsh cleaning chemicals. Dark circles hung under her eyes, the kind that didn't come from one bad night of sleep, but from years of exhaustion. And when footsteps echoed from the main floor, Maria flinched, her shoulders tightening as though she expected to be scolded. Marcus spoke softly. "You don't look okay. I'm Mike, by the way. Just started here today." Maria hesitated, her tired eyes scanning his face, as if deciding whether he could be trusted. Then, slowly, her shoulders slumped. "It's just," her voice broke. "Everything is falling apart. My daughter, Sophia, she needs surgery. Her heart condition is getting worse. And I can't afford," She stopped herself, shaking her head. I'm sorry. You don't need to hear this. Marcus's chest tightened. How long have you worked here? He asked gently. 3 years, Maria whispered. Never late. Never miss a shift. But lately, she gestured toward the bulletin board in the hall. Marcus turned. The schedule pinned to the board was a chaotic mess of scribbles and crossouts. Hours were inconsistent. Some weeks Maria's name had 35 hours. The next week 15. Sometimes even less. They keep cutting my hours, Maria said, barely audible. The manager, Mr. Miller, says it's corporate policy. But I don't understand. This store is always busy. We're always short-staffed. Marcus's jaw tightened. He knew the real corporate policy. Full-time workers were guaranteed steady hours. What he saw here wasn't policy. It was manipulation. Marcus kept his face calm, but inside his anger simmered. He had seen unfair managers before in his long career, but hearing it directly from an employee, here, in his own store, was different. It felt like betrayal. Before he could say more, heavy footsteps echoed down the hallway. The store manager appeared. Mr. Miller, tall, broad-shouldered, with a permanent scowl etched across his face. Miller's presence immediately changed atmosphere. The employees nearby stiffened. A young cashier passing through dropped his gaze to the floor and nearly jogged past, as the proximity to the manager was dangerous. What's going on here? Miller's sharp voice cut through the hallway. His eyes landed on Maria, who still looked pale and shaken. Why aren't you on the floor, Santos? I was just, Maria stammered, clutching her badge. Save it, Miller snapped. You got shelves to clean. Get moving. Maria flinched as if struck. She nodded quickly, mumbling, Yes, sir, before hurrying away. Marcus's fists tightened at his sides. Now Miller's attention shifted to him. And you? Haven't seen you around before. His eyes narrowed. Who are you? Marcus forced a casual smile. Name's Mike. Just started today. Orientation was this morning. Miller gave him a slow, skeptical look, then shrugged. Fine. New blood. Here's some advice. Don't stand around chatting. I run this place tight. We follow corporate policy to the letter. If you've got hours, work them. If I cut them, don't complain. Simple. He gave a cold, humorless chuckle and walked off, barking at another employee about restocking the beverage aisle. Marcus watched him go, his jaw clenched. Corporate policy to the letter? No, that was a lie. And he knew it. Cracks in the system. For the rest of the afternoon, Marcus stayed quiet, blending in. He pushed carts, stocked shelves, and occasionally mopped the floor. He wanted to feel what his employees felt, to see what they saw. It didn't take long for the truth to unfold. Everywhere he turned, employees were exhausted. A young man stocking dairy products muttered about having his hours cut last week. A cashier whispered to a coworker that she wasn't sure if she could make rent. Another custodian admitted he worked 2 other jobs just to survive. And the fear, always the fear. Whenever Miller's shadow appeared, conversation stopped. Laughter died instantly. The atmosphere froze until he left. Marcus had seen enough boardrooms to know when a culture was poisoned, and this one was rotting from the inside. But Maria's face haunted him most. The raw pain in her eyes, the way her voice cracked when she spoke of her daughter, Sophia. She wasn't just another name on payroll. She was a mother fighting to keep her child alive, and his company was failing her. That night, Marcus stayed behind after most of the staff had gone home. He walked the aisle slowly, observing the half-stocked shelves and the tired custodian mopping silently under the harsh fluorescent lights. Every corner of the store seemed to echo with exhaustion. He remembered the last quarterly report that had come across his desk. According to Miller, this location was thriving. High efficiency, loyal staff, strong profits. None of it was true. Numbers had been polished, and the human reality hidden. Marcus clenched his fists. How many other stores were like this? How many other managers were manipulating schedules, stripping workers of hours and benefits, while sending glowing reports back to headquarters? As Marcus turned toward the back, he noticed Maria finishing her shift. She stacked her cleaning supplies neatly in the closet, then sat for a moment on a bench near the loading dock. shoulders slumped with exhaustion. For a long moment, Marcus just watched, torn between revealing himself and staying silent. Finally, he approached. "You should get home to your daughter," he said softly. Maria jumped, startled, then recognized him as the new hire. She gave a tired smile. "I will. I just need a minute. Some nights. I'm so tired I can't even drive straight." Marcus hesitated. "Have you ever thought about leaving this job?" She gave a short, humorless laugh. "And go where? Other stores pay the same, or worse. At least here, I know the routine. Besides, if I quit, I lose even the little income one still have. Sophia needs me to fight, not give up." Her words carried a strength that humbled him. This woman, overlooked by everyone, had more courage than half the executives he'd worked with. That night, as Marcus left the store and walked into the cold evening air, he made himself a promise. This was no longer just a casual visit. It wasn't about testing the waters or checking in on morale. It was personal. He thought about Maria's cracked hands, the cashier whispering about rent, the custodian working 2 other jobs. And above all, he thought about Sophia, a child who might not survive if her mother's company kept failing her. "Not on my watch," Marcus muttered under his breath. For the first time in years, the billionaire CEO didn't feel like an untouchable figure sitting in a glass office. He felt like a father, a son, a human being who could not allow this injustice to continue. The next 48 hours, he knew, would define not only his leadership, but the legacy of his entire company. The following morning, Marcus arrived at the store earlier than anyone else. He slipped in quietly, still wearing his disguise, and walked the aisles as the staff began their shifts. The atmosphere was no different from the night before. The cashiers avoided eye contact. Workers moved quickly, and everyone seemed to live under an invisible weight of fear. But this time, Marcus wasn't just observing. He was planning. He watched Miller storm onto the floor, barking orders at employees and criticizing a young stocker for moving too slowly. The boy couldn't have been more than 19. Yet the way Miller loomed over him, snarling about efficiency, made him shrink into himself. Marcus's jaw tightened. This wasn't management. It was bullying, and he couldn't let it continue. During his lunch break, Marcus sat in the cafeteria with the workers. They were hesitant at first, but gradually, as the minutes passed, he earned their trust by listening rather than speaking. Stories poured out. Missed hours, denied overtime, schedules changed at the last moment, benefits mysteriously disappearing, threats of replacement if anyone complained. It was worse than Marcus had imagined. One woman admitted she had been here for nearly 10 years and still made barely above minimum wage. Another said her health insurance was cut off when her hours were dropped below full-time, even though she had always worked more than 40 hours a week. What struck Marcus most was how normal this all seemed to them. They didn't complain with outrage. They spoke with resignation. It was the acceptance of people who had been beaten down so long they no longer believed change was possible. That realization burned him more than Miller's cruelty. Later that afternoon, Marcus quietly stepped into the back office. Through the cracked door, he overheard Miller on the phone. The manager's voice was slick, confident, filled with lies. "Yes, sir. Everything here is running perfectly. Staff morale couldn't be higher. Profits are strong. We're ahead of projections." He laughed, a low, smug sound, and Marcus felt a wave of disgust. It was clear now. Miller wasn't just bending the truth. He was building a false empire on the backs of suffering employees, polishing the numbers to make himself look good. And corporate had no idea. Marcus's company wasn't broken by accident. It was being sabotaged by people like Miller, who hid the truth to climb higher. That night, Marcus returned to his hotel room and sat staring at the city lights. For the first time in years, he felt the heavy responsibility of his position. He could have walked away, filed a quiet report, fired Miller, and moved on, but that wouldn't fix the deeper issue. This wasn't about one man. It was about a system that had allowed such behavior to thrive in the shadows. As he leaned back, his mind kept drifting to Maria, her tired smile, her trembling voice, and Sophia's fragile future. He pictured the cashier terrified of eviction, the young stocker humiliated for working too slowly, the custodian who worked himself to exhaustion just to feed his family. These weren't numbers. These were lives. And every life mattered. By morning, Marcus had made his decision. The next day would not be business as usual. The mask of Mike, the new hire, would finally come off, and the staff would learn who he really was. But more importantly, they would learn that someone at the very top had been listening and change was coming. The next morning, the store buzzed with the usual tension. Workers rushed to prepare displays. Cashiers counted tills, and Miller prowled the aisles with his sharp gaze, quick to pounce on the smallest mistake. Nobody noticed Marcus at first. He wore the same plain clothes, the same low baseball cap, but inside, he felt different. Today, the act was ending. When Miller barked at Maria for taking too long to clean a spill, Marcus stepped forward. His voice was calm, but firm. That's enough. The room seemed to freeze. Employees glanced up in confusion. Nobody spoke to Miller like that. Miller turned, his face darkening with anger. "Excuse me? Who do you think you are? You're new here. Don't tell me how to run my store." Marcus slowly removed his cap. Gasps rippled across the floor as the workers recognized a man standing before them. The billionaire CEO. The man whose name was printed on every corporate memo, whose face appeared in glossy magazines. Marcus Thompson. Miller's mouth opened, then closed. His usual arrogance faltered. "Sir, I didn't realize." Marcus's gaze was ice. "No, you didn't, and that's the problem." The employees stared wide-eyed as Marcus addressed them directly. "I came here undercover because I wanted to know the truth, not the polished reports, not the corporate lies. The truth. And what I found," he paused, scanning their tired faces, their anxious eyes. "What I found is a team of hard-working people being mistreated, underpaid, and silenced. That ends today." The silence broke into murmurs. Some covered their mouths in shock. Others exchanged glances, unsure whether to believe what they were hearing. Marcus turned back to Miller. "Pack your things. You're done here." Miller stammered, his confidence collapsing. "Please, sir, it's not what it looks like." "It's exactly what it looks like." Marcus cut in sharply. "You built a culture of fear. You manipulated schedules. You stripped people of hours and benefits. You lied to corporate while these people suffered. That is not leadership. That is betrayal." Security escorted Miller out as whispers spread through the staff. Some smiled faintly. Others wiped away tears of relief. For the first time in years, they felt the grip of fear begin to loosen. Marcus stayed. He gathered the employees in the break room, not as their CEO, but as someone who needed to listen. He sat with Maria, with the cashiers, with the custodians. He heard every story, every struggle. And instead of promises, he gave action. Overtime restored. Schedule stabilized. Benefits reinstated. An anonymous hotline created so employees could report abuse without fear of retaliation. When Maria spoke of Sophia, Marcus looked her in the eyes. "Your daughter will get the surgery she needs. That's my word." Tears filled Maria's eyes as her coworkers reached for her hands. For the first time, hope flickered where despair had lived for so long. Over the next 2 days, Marcus worked side by side with the staff. He stocked shelves, carried boxes, and cleaned floors. Not because he had to, but because he needed to feel what they felt, to understand their daily reality. Word spread quickly across the company. A CEO who worked undercover, who stood up against corruption, who cared enough to listen. By the end of the 48 hours, everything had changed. Not just in that store, but across the entire corporation. Audits were launched. New policies enforced. Leadership training overhauled. Marcus made it his mission to root out the culture of fear wherever it lived. But more than policies, it was the message that stayed with the employees. You matter. Your voices count. You are not invisible. Months later, Sophia received her surgery. Maria sent Marcus a simple thank you card, written in shaky handwriting, but filled with gratitude. He kept it in his office drawer, not as a trophy, but as a reminder that leadership isn't about profit margins or polished reports. It's about people. It's about standing up when it's easier to look away. It's about fighting for those who cannot fight for themselves. For Marcus, the undercover visit began as a routine inspection, but it became the turning point of his life, a lesson in loyalty, in courage, and in the true cost of leadership. And for everyone who worked in that once broken store, it was proof that change is possible, even when hope feels lost.